So I spoke about Die Hard previously, and well, I'm speaking about it again. This time, the sequel. After the huge success of the first film, Die Hard pretty much became a franchise. From what I've seen, the films declined in quality after the first, but after watching the sequel, I can say that it doesn't get bad yet. Die Hard 2 is very much an enjoyable watch that I can totally accept as the canon sequel to the original. Although the thing I'd like to say is that Die Hard becoming a franchise is very odd. Die Hard wasn't exactly set up with the potential for a sequel. Gruber and the T-Words died, John McClane embraces with his wife, and they get to go home to see their kids. The end. Now, I don't think it's impossible to follow up from the first film. They could have easily came up with a follow-up story that continued what's seen in the original film. In fact, as I hear in the next film after this, Die Hard with a Vengeance, they gave Hans Gruber a brother named Simon, which I feel was a step in the right direction. Still, if Die Hard was to become a franchise, my suggestion would be to make Hans Gruber the posthumous antagonist of all the sequels, and emphasize that his actions made him a larger-than-life villain. Maybe his brother and the T-Word group he used to roll with in Germany get involved, and getting John McClane back wouldn't be too hard either. Maybe they send assassins after John McClane and Powell, and everyone else who thwarted them. That would also excuse the larger areas of effect each movie. You could be building towards a large-scale conflict. That sounds like an interesting franchise, doesn't it? Well, when they made Die Hard 2, they didn't really do what I suggested. They basically did the Home Alone 2 formula of moving the setting, but making everything pretty similar. Since everyone minus presumably Theo died in the first movie, they basically had a new T-Word group come in as the villains, with no affiliation to Hans Gruber's gang, and John McClane goes through similar shit to what he did in the first movie. Keep in mind that it's done purely by chance, but I suppose I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go through the sequel Die Hard 2 beginning to end. So John McClane, around 2 years after becoming an action hero and barely surviving the first movie, lives to see another Christmas Eve 2 years later. Which again, what a coincidence. And he's waiting for his wife to land at Dulles International Airport in Washington, D.C. We see John McClane's day doesn't start off too well when he's given a parking ticket. Something I like about how the film starts is that it knows what we sat down to watch a sequel to Die Hard for. And it does quick work introducing the bad guys. They scout out the airport and whatnot, and thankfully, we don't get a Call of Duty No Russian situation.
It's much, much worse.
We see that the T-Word plot is much more elaborate than the first. A corrupt and notorious drug lord named Ramon Esperanza is being flown to the United States, and basically, the main bad guy is Colonel William Stewart. Now, in contrast with Hans Gruber, Stewart is a plain unlikable scumbag. Hans Gruber was a charismatic villain who never lost his cool, nor treated his henchmen like shit. But you can forget about that sort of stuff with Stewart. You'll see as the movie goes on, John McClane quickly catches onto the T-Words, in which he has a fight with two of them. I'm happy to say that the action is highly believable like the first movie. I heard by the end of the series, they turned John McClane into a superhuman, but for now, he's still highly vulnerable and open to being damaged. He still has to dodge bullets and take cover. And I actually like the set piece where they do this in an airport luggage area, where the bags are moving on a conveyor belt, and it actually makes for some unique action. John McClane and the pair of T-Words present use luggage to their advantage, although as you can expect, John McClane manages to kill one of the guys as the other guy gets away. Subtle things that show that McClane is still a vulnerable action hero is how he dropped his badge during the fight, so when authorities show up, he is unable to show them his ID, and they have to check his identification, which is what allows the second bad guy to get away. We see upon arriving to the church where the bad guys are set up for their plot, the dude who escaped actually is held at gunpoint for his failure by Colonel Stewart. Stewart sort of subverts the villain kills his own men cliche by pretending he's going to kill him, and upon pulling the trigger, it isn't loaded, but states that should he fail again, he will be executed. I am happy to say though that Stewart never actually acts on the trope for a flimsy reason. It's better to intimidate than outright executing goons, because you've still got someone who can serve you. Like I said in my Star Wars Rebels Season 1 review, A good villain will turn failures into victories, and not just throw a hissy fit when things don't go their way. Stewart, as mentioned before, is a complete contrast to Hans Gruber. He's not a likable villain, and we'll see why shortly. McClane is still as resourceful as the first movie, as he gets the fingerprints of the guy he killed, and we get a welcome cameo of Sergeant Powell from the first movie. And you can piece together that McClane and Powell became friends since and after the events of the first movie. It's also worth noting that McClane is also LAPD now, instead of the New York branch. I am happy to say that the returning characters are used well, as Powell is utilized well as a cameo, and he helps McClane with identifying the deceased T-word. Forensics say that he's a dude who apparently died years ago, and that's suspicious. I also like that despite being revered as a hero after the Nakatomi heist, there's a lot of people who still don't respect him, key of which is Captain Lorenzo, who often tells McClane not to get involved, and it's implied that he thinks that McClane is pretty much a one-time hero, and he won't be as effective again in another T-word plot. I did hear that throughout the course of the movies, McClane usually doesn't feel like being a hero, but he does it anyways, because it's the right thing to do, although he'd rather delegate it to someone else. Basically, throughout the course of the series, he only trusts himself to thwart T-words. In this movie, you can tell that he does get involved a large amount because his wife is on one of the planes. Still though, he refuses to give up so easily, and he ends up being right, as the T-words finally cut the power to the airport and hijacking control as well. The T-words then contact the airport and tells them that their demands are simple, that Esperanza from earlier is about to land. He is to be handed over to the T-words and no one gets hurt. If they try to restore power, there will be consequences. Still though, McClane gets kicked out of airport control, and this is where he makes that self-aware remark about how the same shit can happen to the same guy twice. So when airport security tries to restore power, there's an ambush waiting for them, and among them, surprisingly, is Robert Patrick, a year before Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Although he's not made of liquid metal. The guys with huge machine guns get taken out by the ambush, and McClane forces himself to intervene by climbing through the ducts. He isn't invulnerable though. He does stump his foot a bit when he lands, but is otherwise still in good shape to fight. He rolls around on the floor and eventually tries to push a guy off a scaffolding. Every T-word present, including Robert Patrick, is shot down by McClane, but their distraction was for a higher purpose, as the generator was rigged and blows up. And I suppose this is the motif for ducking down before an explosion, like what was in the first film. As the T-words contact airport control again, the colonel tells them that they're gonna pay the price for trying to fix the generator. McClane contacts airport control after they find out that mostly everyone they sent is dead. And this is where Colonel Stewart overhears McClane's name being mentioned. In true arrogance, he is unintimidated at the fact that McClane is with them. McClane and Stewart start to argue with each other over the radio after this. McClane calls out the colonel for being a traitor to his own nation, and the colonel simply responds that Esperanza is someone bold enough to stand up against communist aggression, showing us that he fully believes in his cause, which is another difference with Gruber. Gruber just wanted to steal the bonds and get rich, and only pretended to be patriotic to fool the police. But in the end of the day, he was in it for himself. The colonel who is willing to betray his own country shows us a more fanatical villain. You can see, however, that his cause is flimsy. It's worth noting that this movie takes place around Christmas of 1990. A year before the Cold War ended. So communism was mostly on its way out as a threat, indicating that the colonel is just a lunatic who is over-obsessed about the threat of communism. And a lunatic he certainly is, as he does something so disturbing that the filmmakers actually had to tone it down. You see, in retaliation for not being listened to, he poses as airport control, using the same frequency as the airport, and proceeding to trick one of the planes into landing with the wrong coordinates. John McClane, however, doesn't just let the plane crash without trying to redirect it. He gets on the runway, trying his hardest to signal the plane with 2 lit up flares to go up, and that it's a trap. The tension rises as the plane follows the T-word's instructions and crashes. And this is where the movie almost got an X rating, because the plane crash was so brutal, with the intense screams of the pilots, staff, and passengers alike as the plane crashed. It was as close to the real thing as possible. This is actually the highest compliment Die Hard 2 could ever receive, that the shock value was so real that it had to be toned down. Yeah, that's right. The filmmakers did too well. If there was ever a moment that lived up to the original, it was this scene, and it's one of the definite highlights. It also cemented Colonel Stewart's place as the most lethal Die Hard villain, having the highest confirmed kill count, as it's referenced that this plane had 230 people aboard. He also does it with next to no emotion. McClane has to look in horror as his attempt to save the plane failed, and he has to deal with the consequences. Not only did the Colonel kill innocent people in the hundreds in the blink of an eye, but he also did this to psychologically torment John McClane and everyone at airport control. He even threatens to follow up with another crash if his demands aren't met. So Stewart may not live up to Hans Gruber in quality, but damn, he is a great villain in his own right. This cements the threat he poses. The movie did not pull any punches, and McClane is completely distraught, along with airport control, with the music on the down low. Eventually some military guys show up, a platoon to be exact, led by one Major Grant. There's some extra clever setup with a radio from earlier in the movie that has a code that leads McClane to know where the T-words are going next. Specifically, the plane that's gonna land with Esperanza on it. Eventually, the airport control do manage to warn the airlines, however, not to land. When Esperanza's plane lands, and the T-words are on to retrieving him, McClane comes in to intercept. Again, he's forced to duck behind cover on the cargo plane, and he's actually outwitted when he's locked in the plane, and the bad guys throw grenades in the cockpit to flush him out once and for all. But there is a solution present. He, as quickly as he can, straps himself into the pilot's chair and ejects himself, and only narrowly survives. This is actually one of the most memorable parts of the movie, and a scene that's pretty similar is the nuking the fridge scene from Indiana Jones. As much as people blindly hate on that scene, it's got the same kind of tension, with Indy and McClane about to be blown up, but due to their quick thinking, they come up with a solution that is incredibly outside the box, and ultimately saves their lives. The T-words do see John McClane escape, but they have no time to shoot him down, and they backtrack to the church. So after making it back to the airport, McClane is talked down by the Major, and is further told not to interfere. And McClane, being who he is, ignores it, tracks the T-words down to the nearby church, scouting all possible nearby hideout locations. And there's actually this fight with one of the T-words on patrol, where McClane stabs an icicle into his eye, killing the guy. Ouch. Unfortunately, the T-words have completely rigged their control center and have snowmobiles to escape. And McClane discovers another complication. He finds out that one of the platoon's firearms was filled with blank rounds, indicating that the firefight was staged, and Major Grant is in fact in league with the T-words. Gee, I didn't actually see that coming. But I like how they aren't making things too easy for the good guys. That's what the first movie also did. McClane actually shows it to the airport security captain Lorenzo, although it is sort of iffy how he decided to demonstrate the fake bullets by shooting directly at Lorenzo in front of the other officers. Finally, Lorenzo is on McClane's side, but due to the supporting character Richard Thornburg announcing how he's trapped on the plane, everyone at the airport panics, now knowing about the T-word threat. McClane hitches a ride in a news helicopter, which was a subplot not relevant until now, with a news reporter pestering McClane, although she contrasts Thornburg with not being a total douchebag, and a promise to interview McClane when this is over. This is where McClane jumps on the T-word's getaway plane, intending to kill them before they take off, and they're home free. Major Grant goes out to fight McClane to knock him off, and Stewart watches him, showing how low this guy can go as he doesn't help his ally. And this leads to Grant's death, when McClane knocks him into a propeller, and just like Syndrome in The Incredibles, he's fucked. The Colonel then steps in, beating the shit out of McClane due to his advanced hand-to-hand combat training, although McClane does manage to open the fuel tank as Colonel Stewart knocks him off the plane. I do like that the Colonel's kick allowed the fuel tank to be opened and for the fuel to spill. McClane takes advantage of this in a final attempt to serve justice out to the T-words, lighting the fuel on fire, which of course results in a chain reaction and the flames catch up to the plane just as it's taking off, causing the plane to catch on fire, and Colonel Stewart, along with the other murderers, get what they deserve as the plane blows up. And the flames even allow the regular planes nearly out of fuel to land with a clear signal, and the day is saved. I love a cause and effect as superb as this. The Colonel subtly caused his own demise. Every other plane is saved. And now I would like to mention that there is a subplot on McClane's wife's plane, where Richard Thornburg from the first movie, who I previously mentioned was also on the plane, and he's ironically played by the same guy as Walter Peck from Ghostbusters. He was especially a dick in that movie, and he is here. Just thought I'd mention this. So McClane gets to see his wife alive and well, and they ironically play the same music as the first movie, which is a Christmas song, and that was Die Hard 2. I'd have to say that it's a good experience that I'd absolutely watch again alongside the first movie, although the first movie is obviously better. The second movie actually does have a bunch of plot holes that occur if you think about stuff hard enough. Why the planes didn't land at another airport is questionable, since in the real world, there are other airports nearby. Jules isn't the only one. And if burning the T-word plane could help guide the planes down, why didn't airport control try that earlier? I don't know. It is worth noting that the time span of the movie is a few hours at most, so maybe the easy solution wasn't thought up of. John McClane thwarts another T-word plot, though I expressed that it probably shouldn't have been villains that were unrelated to Gruber's gang. The connected story idea I would have preferred, but again, in Die Hard with a Vengeance, they go in the right direction with that. That'll be interesting to see. I somewhat am not that nervous about the third movie now that I've seen the second movie, and I can enjoy it for what it is. But still, I'm sweating for the fourth and fifth movie, because the whole thing might be played out by then. Still, I'd say I'd give Die Hard 2 a solid 8 out of 10. It's not exactly an innovative film, but the filmmakers understood what you sat down for, and they gave you more of the first movie, with a revamped but similar scenario. It's not quite Home Alone 2 exactly, despite what I said earlier. So with that being said, I'm JJ Plagiarisms, and until next time, what are stories but mystery boxes? Under the mountain.